Welcome back into the Lions 24/7 podcast. I am Tyler Donohue, and just a little while you hear from my colleague at Lions247.com, Tyler Calvaruso, our recruiting insider. And it is a great time to be following along with a recruiting insider at Lions247.com because the month of June is nearly upon us. We're making that move here this week from May to June, and things are about to ramp up in a big way. Every single weekend here upcoming, official visitors on campus. We've got camps back here on campus as well this upcoming Sunday. A bunch of us from Lions247.com will be back on the Penn State fields to see the latest crop of prospects making their way from within the region, from across the country. It's going to be a fun upcoming couple of weeks here and really a couple of months before we get into preseason camp with all the recruiting action taking place here on campus. Break that down and much more with Tyler Calvaruso, but we begin with some big picture Big Ten conference talk. And if you listen to our last episode of this podcast, which dropped right before Memorial Day weekend, I hope you all enjoyed your holiday weekend wherever it led you. But we had a couple 24/7 Sports beat reporters, Stephen Brooks, who covers Michigan State, and David Eichholt, who covers Iowa, to take an early preview at those recently scheduled primetime matchups. Michigan State, of course, a Black Friday game in Detroit now to finish off the Big Ten schedule. And then we got the September whiteout extraordinaire that we always get here in Happy Valley with Iowa coming to town. So we took a closer look at those two specific matchups, but plenty more to dissect in this conference. We'll do that right now with Brad Crawford, if I can get your name out of my mouth, who does a great job covering the national college football recruiting landscape at 247sports.com. You've certainly seen his content at Lions 24/7. Brad, thanks for making some time for us here on a Tuesday afternoon.
Yeah, Ty, no problem, man. I'm looking forward to seeing if the SEC goes to 8 or 9 game schedule here in SEC spring meetings, and just a busy off season, transfer portal stuff still active. And it's talking season with national polls and preseason rankings about to start coming out this summer.
Yeah, as our friend Josh Pate likes to say, there is no offseason. It certainly feels like it. I know you get those vibes with the way you handle your work. And you recently published a piece breaking down team by team in the Big Ten, best case scenario versus worst case scenario. And I think we've witnessed here in Happy Valley over the last few seasons what those can look like. 2020 pandemic season here in Penn State, at least, it played out like a worst case scenario, 0-5 start. They bounced back to win it. But last year, coming off a 7-6 season, there were a lot of unknown factors across the roster on the coaching staff, and ultimately 11 wins, a Rose Bowl victory. That feels like best case scenario. So can you break it down from a Penn State perspective as we get things off? And then I want to do a bit of a summer progress report across the conference because you did this for every team, and we got a few that I really want to focus in on.
Yeah, the Big Ten is by far the most competitive league in college football. I think there's 4 potential playoff contenders, obviously 3 big ones in the Big Ten East. Last year of divisions, so if Wisconsin plans to get to the playoff, this would be the year to do it. But, just a super competitive conference. I think there's 3 top 10 teams in the preseason. I actually had Penn State number 5 in my January way too early poll. I think I have them 6 or 7 maybe coming out of spring. But Penn State's a team where I think there's 7 or 8 teams nationally who can get to the playoff and win it. Penn State is certainly one of those. And, yeah, best case scenario would be 12-0. And I think in that article, Ty, I had Penn State's worst case 9-3, and that would mean losses to Michigan, Ohio State, and then some hiccup game somewhere in between.
I mean, that's saying a lot for that to be the floor right now for Penn State. Right. Now, James Franklin has had a cluster of 11-win seasons, but where we were this time last year, there was just a lot of uncertainty. The team was essentially right around the 500 mark the previous 2 campaigns combined. And now you're talking about best case scenario being unbeaten, worst case scenario, a 9-3 record, which out of the Big Ten is going to get you to a really strong bowl game at the end of the day, not a Rose Bowl level bowl game, but a quality matchup. And you mentioned Ohio State and Michigan, and those are viewed right now as the potential roadblocks for Penn State on an annual basis. For a while, Ohio State controlled this division in the East, and the last couple of years, of course, Michigan has ascended to the first place finish and the college football playoff berth. So when we examine those 2 teams, who are you giving the edge to right now in that way too early poll that you updated coming out of the spring? And what's your best case, worst case scenario for the defending Big Ten champs, Michigan?
Yeah, I think Michigan's best case is another 12-0 regular season, having, taken Ohio State's number the last 2 years. Obviously, Blake Corum, Domin Edwards back in the backfield. McCarthy heading into year 2 as a starting quarterback. I know he kind of battled Cade McNamara there last September. McNamara now at Iowa he's going to be an impact transfer in the Big Ten. But I do like Michigan. It's probably the front runner right now in the league. I'd probably put Penn State and Ohio State right there as 2A, 2B. But getting back to Penn State for a second, the reason I had them in the preseason top 5 is everything about this team to me screams national title caliber, because you look at, the roster from a whole. Penn State finally has the 5-star quarterback that James Franklin has not had in Happy Valley. There's 2 sophomore running backs in Nick Singleton and Katron Allen coming off those incredible first years. Both those guys are capable of 1,000-yard seasons. Then you've got 3 seniors up front, a sophomore, and then Fashanu, who's probably a top 10 pick in 2024. So there's a lot I like about this team, not to mention 10 upperclassmen starters returning on defense. So I like Penn State a lot, and I think Penn State right now actually has fewer questions than Ohio State for that second spot. So Jim Knowles' defense was a question, maybe not the first couple of months of the year, but against Michigan, man, gave up way too many yards and losing again. And Ryan Day brought him in to beat Michigan, and it didn't happen. So I think if you're an Ohio State fan right now, you're leery of the Wolverines and Nittany Lions.
Penn State will face the Buckeyes, of course, this year, and Michigan, as they do every year. We think that will remain the case even after conference realignment, but we'll find out eventually. When it comes to these two teams, though, Michigan has finally broken through. We all wondered if Jim Harbaugh was going to get that done, not only once, but twice over now. When you look at this 2023 Wolverines team, what gives you the biggest confidence for their staying power atop the conference? And then what gives you the most pause that they'll be able to do this the 3rd time in a row?
I think the defense is going to be really good. The backfield I had ranked number 1 out of any backfield in the country coming into this season. Blake Corum, Edwards, as I've mentioned, they're 2 guys who would start anywhere. Maybe one of those guys wouldn't start at Penn State with that 2-headed monster the Lions got. But I just think Michigan, the window is right now for Jim Harbaugh to win his first title. Jaden Davis, 5-star quarterback coming in 2024. Recruiting is starting to expand. He has some momentum there in Ann Arbor. Finally getting over the hump 2 years ago against Ohio State, I think that has widened the footprint as far as recruiting goes. And Jim Harbaugh is now, landing some of those elite players maybe he didn't get his first few years. So Michigan's a team that I think right there with Georgia, I'd put those 2 teams 1 and 2 to open the season. And like I said, Ohio State, I'm just not as sold on right now as a preseason playoff team. But Michigan, you can go ahead and lock it in Sharpie.
Penn State will host Michigan in Beaver Stadium on November 11th this season. Penn State will visit Columbus, Ohio to take on the Buckeyes October 21st. Before they get to those matchups, they take on a team that you mentioned a little earlier who has a new quarterback that we've seen, Cade McNamara. David Eichholt, who does a great job with Iowa's site, was breaking down what the Hawkeyes' outlook is. He's quite optimistic about what they can accomplish considering some of the retooling they've done from a roster standpoint. There weren't any fireworks for the coaching staff. As we know, they retained their offensive coordinator, that father-son combination. But this is going to be an early test for Penn State and certainly for Iowa. September 23rd, whiteout setting, national showcase kind of game in prime time, 8 p.m. on CBS. What kind of an Iowa team do you think is going to try it out there on the field this September?
Yeah, I think Iowa's best case scenario would be a 10-win season, largely because schedule favorability. As you know, Tyler, that means everything in the Big Ten. And the toughest games against Penn State in Week 4, going to Happy Valley, as you mentioned. But Iowa does not have to play Michigan or Ohio State. I think Wisconsin is probably their second toughest game, another road game. And they get Penn State in a good spot, believe it or not, because the week before that, the Nittany Lions, I think, travel to Illinois. And we know that'll be one of the most physical games of the year against a defense that lost some NFL guys, but is still hard-hitting, still going to be really good. They've got Newton in the middle. Illinois does. He's probably a top 15 pick in 2024. So I think Penn State's going to be a little bit beat up going into that Iowa game. But I do like Penn State at home in that one. I think it's Penn State's probably third or fourth toughest game this season outside of those big 2 in the East. But that's a game that in September I think Penn State fans need to be aware of because it's coming off of that Illinois road trip.
Yeah, what do you make of Illinois this year? I mean, they're a team that shocked a lot of folks back in 2021 when they came here and picked up a win, and what required 15 overtimes. It felt like we were almost there. What are they bringing to the Big Ten West here in 2023? It didn't get a chance to cross paths with them last year, but there's going to be a lot of intrigue, and I'd imagine a little bit of a revenge vibe around the Penn State squad when we get to that week.
Yeah, watching the NFL draft, a few weeks ago, I just couldn't believe the number of Illinois defensive players that were coming off the board. Brett Bielema had so many picks that was an elite unit last year. Probably should have beaten Michigan on the road. You ask any Illinois fan, they probably got hosed in that game in Ann Arbor in the second half of that game. I remember there was a couple calls where could have gone Illinois' way and they could have won that one. But I expect a very hard-nosed team. They reached into the portal, got Luke Altmaier from Ole Miss, quarterback who sort of battled Jackson Dart there last spring in Oxford under Lane Kiffin. Could not win the starting job. He also backed up Matt Corral, the former pick of the Carolina Panthers there in the SEC. So Luke Altmaier is a guy who he has experience, but we don't know if he's going to be the difference maker type in the Big Ten. And obviously, going to Penn State is an SEC type environment for him. So that's going to be a very interesting road game early for Luke Altmaier. They open against Toledo and they go to Kansas in week 2. So we're talking about Toledo, Kansas, Penn State, 3 straight pretty challenging games to open the year for Brett Bielema.
Illinois will host the Nittany Lions September 16th. And then, look, you've got a 2-win range right now in place for that best case, worst case for Illinois, 7-5, 5-7, a much wider range. And I completely understand why with the Michigan State Spartans. You've got best case scenario 8-4, which is hurt. That hurts as a Spartans fan, I'd imagine, coming off of what they accomplished in 2021.
Yeah.
Worst case scenario 4-8. And I detailed this a little bit when we were talking about that Black Friday matchup. If they are, 3-8, 4-7 going into that national showcase game on a Friday night against what we think will be a very talented Penn State game, I don't know what that means for Mel Tucker, 2 years into that contract extension. But where do you wrap your head around this team? It's so difficult considering the Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde kind of results we've gotten from them the last couple seasons.
Yeah, sadly for Spartan fans, that means Mel Tucker is going to keep his job because he has the highest buyout, I think, right now in college football on one of the worst contracts, by the way. I think his buyout's $88 million right now after the 2023 season, which is just astronomical. But you look at Michigan State's September schedule, man, and it is brutal. They're going to open wins against Central Michigan and Richmond. And then 3 straight weeks, they host Washington, top 10 team. They host Maryland. Talia Tagovailoa is one of the Big Ten's top returning quarterbacks. Maybe kind of a Heisman dark horse type this year. And then they close out the opening month. They go to Iowa. So we're talking about a possible 2-3 start before the open week heading into October against Rutgers. So, Mel Tucker's got to find a way to somehow start this September stretch 3-2. I don't know if he can. He lost Peyton Thorne to the transfer portal. Keon Coleman was the much bigger loss. They did sign a D tackle from A&M who is going to be a day one starter, impact player there. But yeah, I'm not really sure what to make of Michigan State. 8 wins would be best case scenario to me, and that would probably mean a 3-2 start, probably beating Maryland, or maybe splitting between Maryland and Iowa. But you just don't know what's going to happen at quarterback for the Spartans, and then losing a playmaker like Coleman who averaged 15 to 16 yards a catch last season. That's hard to fill at Michigan State.
There's 3 other less prominent matchups on Penn State's schedule. I just wanted to address each of those opponents. Not going to get the kind of fanfare, but those are kind of the games you want to avoid tripping up along the way. And Northwestern is one of them. And look, Pat Fitzgerald's lengthy tenure, it always felt like every couple of years flirting with double-digit wins and a significant bowl appearance. Well, they're in a scary situation right now in 2023, coming off of a 4-20 combined record the last couple of seasons. What do you think about their chance to pivot as a program, or maybe just stay in the basement?
I like Pat Fitzgerald a lot. He's won Big Ten Coach of the Year before. He's led that team to a couple Big Ten championship game appearances where he did not have the talent to do so. So Northwestern's going to be well coached. They almost somehow knocked off C.J. Stroud in Ohio State last season in that windy game, almost like Northwestern's defense had a 12th man because of the wind. Stroud said it was almost impossible to throw. So chalk that up to some weather. But Northwestern's schedule is not easy, man. Like you said, they host Penn State and Evanston in the month of September. They host Minnesota in September. They got to go to Duke in week 3. And Duke, I think, won 8 games last season under Mike Elko. They got a early round quarterback in Riley Leonard. So Northwestern is looking at probably another 2-10, 3-9 type season. If there is a Big Ten game that I think Northwestern can win, it might be Purdue in November or possibly that season opener at Rutgers.
So Penn State pays a visit to Evanston to finish off their schedule in September. Remember, last year, Penn State, right before the bye week, hosted the Wildcats. It was a torrential downpour kind of situation in Beaver Stadium, a 17-7 win. Felt more dominant than the final score, but a pretty ugly performance overall. The last couple matchups here, a few matchups here to get to. Indiana and Maryland go back-to-back. They finish October home against the Hoosiers. Then they travel to College Park, where feels like that Maryland crowd is always trying to ramp up and the program trying to ramp up for a big performance against Penn State, and they seemingly fall flat each time. Those two teams, I'll bunch them together here because they've been kind of the middle of the pack Big Ten East teams. They've had some years. Maryland certainly more consistent of late, but neither one of them feel like they're primed to jump in a big way. But if there's some room for one of them, do you think it's Maryland over Indiana to have that kind of a bounce back kind of or build off year, I guess I should call it?
Yeah, I think Maryland could possibly win 8 games this year. They're going to lose to the 3 or 4 teams on the schedule that Mike Locksley just doesn't compare in terms of talent. But then you go to Indiana. They open the season against Ohio State on September 2nd, and that game's in Bloomington. But that's probably the toughest season opener Tom Allen's had in a long time. And then after the midseason bye week, I think Indiana has a stretch where they go to Michigan. They host Rutgers, then they go to Penn State, and they host Wisconsin. That's probably 3 blowouts for Tom Allen after last season's demise. And, he's probably a guy that, let's face it, if he loses 9 games again, he might be on the hot seat, and Indiana's a job that opens up in the Big Ten. So I think Maryland's in a better situation right now. Maryland knows who its quarterback's going to be. Tagovailoa is going to be a 3-year starter there and, has a chance to lead the program with some records this fall if he can stay healthy and throw it around a little bit.
And you've got Maryland with a 6-6 worst case, Indiana 6-6 best case. That kind of tells the story right there. And Maryland's non-conference schedule, as you noted in your piece, that's going to do them some favors and bulking up that win total from the looks of it. Townsend, Charlotte, and Virginia coming to town in Virginia before they launch a Big Ten play. The last team to get to here, and Greg Schiano would seemingly face a really important prove-it type of year with Rutgers, who did not take the step forward that program was looking for last season in the Big Ten East, where it's hard to take any steps forward for a lot of these programs. Rutgers is the last home game for the Nittany Lions, November 18th. What do you make of the Scarlet Knights here under Schiano?
So there's a chance that Rutgers can get to a bowl game this season if they can, start the year with some momentum. They open up against Northwestern. That's a winnable game. They host Temple the following week. That's a winnable game. And then Virginia Tech. So 3 straight winnable home games for Schiano, and that's already halfway to 6 wins, which is all you need to play in the postseason. Then they go to Michigan. Then they go to Wisconsin. They host Michigan State. So the schedule gets tougher from there. But I think if Gavin Wimsatt, he's probably the starting quarterback for Rutgers this season. If he can play well the first few weeks of the year, get some early momentum, maybe get a confidence boost here or there, Rutgers may have a chance where they're coming down the stretch in October, November, where they need 1 or 2 more wins for bowl season. And I think they can get that possibly at Indiana or that season finale against Maryland, because that game's at home. And like I said, Maryland's a team that's probably 7 or 8 wins. So if Rutgers plays well enough to win that game, they can get to 6-6. I'm not projecting it though.
Well, we heard a lot about the top of the Big Ten East here in this segment. I wanted to finish the conversation here with the Big Ten West and your thoughts. We touched on a few of those teams here because Penn State's got them on the schedule. But how do you see that kind of when it comes down to that final stretch and Thanksgiving's right around the corner? Who's involved there, and what's your early pick at this point to emerge and go to Indianapolis?
Yeah, if there was one team, Tyler, that I would lay dark horse playoff odds on from the Big Ten outside of the big 3, it would definitely be Wisconsin. I think Tanner Mordecai is one of the best pickups at quarterback in the portal this cycle. I know we didn't have him at 24/7 as a top 3 transfer quarterback, but I think he is. Obviously, getting Phil Longo to come over to call plays from UNC. Longo has helped develop Drake May into a star quarterback last 2 years. Now he gets to work with Mordecai. You got Luke Fickell coming in, who this was one of the best offseason coaching hires that any Power 5 program made. The most important thing about all this, though, despite the roster changes, coaching changes, is Wisconsin's schedule. They're not going to play. They're playing one nationally ranked team. I think it is Ohio State. Here I see on October 28th. Outside of that, there's probably no other top 20 opponent on the schedule. So you're looking at best case scenario, possibly being 11-1 for Wisconsin, and then playing the Big Ten East champion in Indianapolis for a chance to go to the playoff. And Luke Fickell's already been there before. He has experience. He developed far less talent at Cincinnati than he's going to have in Madison. So I like the way this Wisconsin team sets up, man. I like how the schedule looks. And if there's a team that's maybe not getting enough love nationally as a possible top 15 right now, I think it's the Badgers.
Last thing to leave us on here, Brad, you also had a piece about programs that dominated the offseason, and you can apply that domination term in a lot of different ways, and you did that yourself, tailoring it to Penn State specifically as well. Can you kind of break down why they made your list and why maybe it's a little bit different than surface value when you see domination? I think people think 30 transfer portal pickups in the modern college football era.
Yeah, when coaches feel really good about their starting 22, 11 on offense, 11 on defense, there isn't a dire need to go taking chances on guys in the portal like a la, Lane Kiffin's kind of philosophy at Ole Miss. He's done that last couple of years, some other programs. The fact that Penn State did not go transfer portal heavy this cycle tells me that James Franklin really feels confident this is a group that can not only contend for a playoff spot, but, win the Big Ten without needing a bunch of fill-ins. Wideout was certainly a position that needed to be addressed. I think it was with Dante Cephas and Malik McClain. Both them guys are going to play a lot. I think Cephas is going to start in the slot. And you see this kind of at other programs too. Alabama and Georgia, they don't sign heavy portal classes. They just sort of fill immediate needs, cherry pick guys they want, and that's it. And then, I can count on one hand how many transfers Dabo Swinney and Clemson have taken. They're still winning 10, 11 games a year. So I think Franklin likes this lineup. Barring injury, I think Penn State's a team that right now you got to feel good about. And the one drawback I have, it sort of seems like Penn State has won the offseason national championship along with Florida State as far as the two most hyped teams. Talent aside, I felt better about Penn State maybe in January, February than I do now, only because now you're facing pressure. Penn State might be a preseason top 15 team. Top 10 team, excuse me. So I think Franklin knows that championship window is here with Drew Allar, two stud running backs, and a really good O-line, really good defense. So Penn State's a team that I expect in late November will be playing for a spot in that playoff.
Brad Crawford has it dialed into the national college football recruiting, national college football landscape. We'll leave the recruiting to everyone else, but Brad, we appreciate it year round, day by day, a bunch of stuff at our site, no matter the time of year is. And as we highlighted some of these pieces, some really fun conference wide commentary coming out from you of late. Brad, thanks for the time. Hopefully we'll get you on the podcast down the road and look forward to your continued coverage ahead of the season.
I appreciate the invite, man. I'm looking forward to September and getting these games underway.
That's right. Take care. Let's get into the recruiting aspect, as I just referenced right now with Tyler Calvaruso, our recruiting insider at Lions247.com. Tyler, how we doing?
Doing well, man. I'm glad to be back talking ball with you. We're starting to hit that busy stretch, man. It's a good time of the year.
We're there. It's May 30th as we record early afternoon. Tomorrow's the final day of the month, and then June is upon us, which means official visits are upon us. Prospect camps are back in Happy Valley. So there is a ton to get into, but I think it's really important that we begin this conversation with the official visits as the centerpiece, because we've been kind of setting the stage for this phase of the recruiting calendar for months now.
Yeah, and it all starts this weekend. June 9th is the loaded weekend that we've been talking about a lot, but this weekend's shaping up to be almost just as loaded. We've confirmed that Liam Andrews and DeJuan Lane are going to be on campus. Those are two of Penn State's top 2024 targets at this point in the cycle. Then you factor in the likes of Jalen Harvey, who's been a top edge target for a long time at this point. Jalen Horton's becoming to campus, who is a top wide receiver target for the staff. There's a lot of good things happening for Penn State on the trail right now. There's going to be a lot of top targets who are leaning towards Penn State, either leaning towards Penn State or Penn State has put itself in a pretty good position to make a serious move during the official visit. Chris Cole is one of those guys, a top 100 linebacker from Virginia. So it starts this weekend, man. It's going to be a lot of top targets coming to campus these first 2 weekends of the month. And June 2nd and June 9th are going to be the ones we're keeping a really, really close eye on. There's going to be a lot of movement there.
You've got a really thorough preview of these June official visit weekends up at Lions247.com for our VIP subscribers. Up on Tuesday morning, I think it's important to note you do have the updates tab pretty high up in this story as well, because there are going to be some rescheduling. There are going to be some canceled visits. There are going to be added visits. That's what June in college football is all about. Some of these guys wait till Wednesday, Thursday of official visit week to actually make the final decision on where them and their families are really going to end up that Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And we saw last year, Tyler, I think it was only one official visitor that first weekend of June. And then the rest of the way it was a little more loaded up. What do you think about them starting this month off with a loaded list? You touched on a few of the blue chips. It's a lengthy group, and then you start factoring in moms, dads, girlfriends, siblings, whoever else is going to be on campus. And this staff is getting right into sprint mode as June gets underway.
Yeah, I think that it's really just a matter of wanting to get the first crack at a lot of these guys. Last year it was just Jason Moore, the defensive end who wound up at Ohio State. He was the only visitor on campus during the first weekend of June. And while that provided a more intimate setting for Moore, who was one of Penn State's top targets in 2023 at that point in the cycle during official visit season, I think that hosting a magnitude of top targets instead of just one, it's a good move by the staff. It also allows you, later in the month, in the June 23rd official visit weekend, which is the final one of June, it kind of allows you to save that weekend for, guys who have scheduling issues and have to make it to campus later on, or, maybe some potential late bloomers when it comes to where guys stand on the board, depending on how other chips fall. The board's going to look different on June 23rd than it does right now. I can tell you that for a fact, depending on how some of these visits play out. So, that June 23rd weekend could be guys who maybe weren't previously high on the board. You get them a little bit higher, depending on maybe guys winding up elsewhere, guys, taking their recruitments in a different direction. And then you could do that late in the month. That's what you kind of have that freedom with a big official visit weekend to start the month as opposed to a big one at the end of the month. So I think these are all things that the staff, they take under consideration when they put together the June official visit schedule. Obviously, at the end of the day, it comes down to when these kids are able to make it to campus and when they want to make it to Penn State as opposed to when they want to make it to other places. But yeah, I think Penn State wants to hit the ground running this month. This is a very loaded month. I'm going to use the word loaded a lot because really that's just the best way to describe it. If you look at some of these names who are coming to campus, so they're looking to hit the ground running with a lot of their top targets. A bigger first weekend of June that allows them to do that.
Yeah, far bigger first weekend of June compared to last year. And then when you work our way towards the second weekend, and by the way, there's going to be a camp, the first prospect camp here of the summer in State College on June 4th, this upcoming Sunday. You're going to have a long look at that at Lions247.com with live updates and then photos and videos and our articles that come out after all these things. Plenty of those just to kind of set the stage. We'll be at all of these camps just as we were over the course of last summer. There's going to be 7-on-7 action to cover, which is always a huge deal with teams coming from across the region. Good look at quarterbacks, a good look at some of those skill position players. New offers always pop up. Underclassmen get under that microscope. There'll be big man camps. So I don't want to distract too much from our official visit conversation, but there is a lot of camp conversation to be had here on the podcast moving forward. We'll start to preview some of that a little bit more with our second episode this week. But getting back into the official visit discussion, Tyler Calvaruso, that June 9th through 11th weekend, I mean, you just work your way through here, and you got Nick Marsh, a top 24/7, a top 24/7 guy out of Michigan. You've got a top 24/7 tight end in Caleb Odom out of Georgia. You've got a 5-star edge rusher / linebacker prospect in Jamonte Waller out of Mississippi, and that's just 3 deep on a list that goes far, far longer than that. I just wanted to kind of spotlight those guys because, look, you got top talent from Michigan, Georgia, Mississippi, and elsewhere. That's the kind of blanket, I guess you could say, that this staff is casting here in June.
The fact that, you didn't get to mention Jameer Grimsley just shows you how loaded that weekend is. Because on any other weekend, he would be either the headline guy or one of the headline guys, and he's like 5th in the conversation just because of how busy the weekend is in terms of where some of these guys are ranked who are going to be on campus. With just starting with Waller, I've been still cautiously projecting him, just given the fact that he's got to go through all these SEC official visits. And, the intel has indicated, it's been consistent too, which is obviously a good thing from a reporting standpoint, that Penn State is his leader entering the official visit slate. But I really do want to see how things play out for him. I think that, getting down to some of these SEC schools, it could potentially swing things. But Penn State has won battles like this before. It just won one with Dakari Nelson this past cycle. It had TJ Parker on board for a little bit. I know it seems like his recruitment's just still tends to come up whenever we talk about guys from the South. But, I know Penn State didn't hang on to him, but it still had him on board for a little while. And that speaks to the staff's ability to go down south and, win some battles with top targets. And Waller's one of those guys who falls into that category. I don't think they're going to win it with Caleb Odom in the end. I think that this is one of the two big swings that Penn State is really taking at tight end now that it has Luke Reynolds on board. They love Luke Reynolds. They're really happy to have him in the fold. But with Caleb Odom, he's one of those guys that he's more of a luxury than a need at this point in the cycle. But don't make no mistake about it. Penn State staff really loves him. They would love to add him. I think he's going to stay down south, but we'll see. And just Grimsley, top cornerback target on the board right now for Terry Smith. From Florida, he's going to be up. Malachi Williams. I mean, these guys who are big-time guys on the board who, kind of flying under the radar. And then you got Nick Marsh who, when we look at this weekend, Nick Marsh might be the most important visitor to me, just from a positional need perspective, talent perspective, and where, what the staff is prioritizing and what it wants to accomplish during its June official visit slate. I think that Marsh is a player Penn State has pushed very, very hard for since he decommitted from Michigan State, and to get him on campus during its big official visit weekend where all the commits are going to be in town. We didn't even mention that. Almost all of the commits are going to be in town on June 9th. Corey Jackson's the only one who's not going to be. He's going to be there this weekend. So you've got 13 of the 14 guys who are already committed on campus to pitch a vision. It's not a coincidence that the staff has set this up where their most loaded and busiest weekend is June 9th, where all these commits are going to be in town. So it's going to be a lot of action going on in Happy Valley that weekend. I'm excited for it. And I think, if things go well with guys like Marsh, and they continue to trend with Waller, it could be a weekend that we look back at as a special one for this class when it's all said and done.
And what does it look like when targets and commits get in the same area? Well, there can be a little bit of a full court press, but it's more about trying to pick off on each other's vibes, shared interest. I think what kind of goes under the radar when you look at what the impact of those weekends can be is what mom and dad are doing. Mom and dad of the targets, mom and dad of the commits. They're having a great time too. They're socializing. Drinks might be flowing in different parts of the weekend. You get to really kick back and break down why you think this is the right fit for your son, and maybe what some of your concerns are about other schools. And there's a lot that can be worked out when you get those parents together as well. We'll talk about that and that impact coming up here in a bit, because we're still a little ways off from that weekend. But that's weekend 2 of June. It's a big one, as you said, a large wave of commits of this growing class, and we're going to expect that class to be expanding as we work our way towards the midpoint of June. And when you start to work into the second half of that month, I want to caution, because we kind of are doing some stargazing here. I know a lot of our readers and listeners do the same thing. They want to see where the top 24/7 guys are, where the 4-star, 5-star prospects are landing. But you mentioned a name there in week 2 before we move toward the second half of June, Malachi Williams. And I think he's a pretty good example of guy that can kind of get swept under the rug a little bit when you get all excited for this. He's a 3-star in 24/7 sports composite rankings. We're talking about an edge rusher out of Monsignor Bonner and Drexel Hill, a top 20 overall player in the state of Pennsylvania, but not a top 5 or 10 guy based on the current evaluation from our site. And yet could be a really important piece of this class when it's all said and done, after we get done talking about all these blue chip players. What do you think about a player like Williams and maybe some other in-state 3-star level players or regional 3-star level players that we need to be careful not to overlook because of how busy this month's going to be?
Just starting with Williams, I mean, it seems like there's been maybe a little bit of a shift in his recruitment over the last couple of days, maybe over the last week, where, we've been talking about it. And I wrote it, as recently as this morning, that it was looking like, Penn State and Notre Dame were the two really fighting for Williams, but now it's looking like Notre Dame is a little bit stocked down there. I'm not even sure Williams is going to make that official visit at this point, and that would leave Penn State in a pretty good spot. I know Williams has mentioned to me in the past that he'd be looking to visit, I believe it was Pittsburgh and Syracuse were the two that he mentioned to me, but when we talked, he didn't have dates locked in for those visits yet. So, his official visit schedule is kind of fluid and one we'll be keeping an eye on, but Penn State has an edge with him heading into the official visit slate, regardless of whether or not he visits Notre Dame. I think Notre Dame staying in the picture would make things interesting, but I think there's a chance that Notre Dame is kind of filling up at the position, and that would leave Williams on the outside looking in, and that would be good news for Penn State. Another in-state defensive lineman who, he was originally anticipated to be visiting Penn State was David Polypale. He won't be visiting. I believe it was June 16th. He was scheduled. He told me that he was looking at other dates to get that visit done. And right now, Michigan is the only other official visit that has locked in. I put a crystal ball pick in for the Wolverines. I think they're trending pretty heavily for him at this point in that recruitment. I think that, there was a time where he wasn't necessarily high on the board. And I think that kind of changed in recent months, and Penn State kind of upped its pursuit a little bit, but Michigan was kind of there from the start in that regard. They kind of, when they offered, they were very consistent with their approach. He has a good relationship with that staff. And, there were concerns from the Polypale family about, him venturing outside of the region, but it looks like the relationship with the Michigan staff has kind of reached a point where, those concerns have been alleviated. I mentioned Hornsby for this weekend. He's a 3-star guy. He's a composite 4-star guy, but Penn State staff loves him. Xavier Gilliam is another one. He's a 3-star from Maryland. He's played a lot of defensive end throughout his high school career, but he projects as an interior guy at the next level for Penn State. It looks like the Nittany Lions had the team to beat for him there heading into his official visit this weekend. So I've been pondering putting in a crystal ball pick for that one. I do want to do a little bit more checking in with some sources before getting to that point, but Penn State's looking pretty good. I mean, really, beyond that, it comes down to guys like, let me think, because there are some definitely ones that, like you said, we've been focused on the top 24/7 guys. There are a lot of under-the-radar guys on this list as well. Ethan Callaway, 4-star tackle from North Carolina. He's going to be on campus June 16th. Fellow North Carolina native Kai Greer, offensive lineman. He's going to be on campus June 16th. The list goes on. Benedict Dume, I know he's a top 24/7 guy, but his recruitment's been on the quieter end. He's also going to be around on the 16th. And then on the 23rd, that last weekend that we touched on a little bit, DeAndre Cook from Washington, D.C. at Friendship Collegiate. He's going to be on campus. I think that Penn State – I think there's a situation where Cook is entering his June official visit schedule with Penn State on top. And I think if the staff, kind of pushes a little bit hard depending on how some other defensive lineman recruitments play out, I think that Cook could wind up in the class. But, that's something that we're kind of a ways off in that regard. I think we need to see what happens with other defensive line targets before getting to that point. So, we just touched on I don't even know how many names, but
that's a lot.
That just speaks to where we're at with this official visit schedule. Busy, loaded. We could use a lot of adjectives to describe it.
Yeah, and a complete list of these confirmed official visits as they currently stand on May 30th over at Lions247.com or for our VIP subscribers. I do want to get into that third weekend, though. You talked about a couple of these players in North Carolina, lineman Kai Greer, Ethan Callaway, some of those, Benedict Ume, who you mentioned. And I wanted to get to Ume here. From Avon Old Farms up in Connecticut. He's one of 2 Connecticut prep players making the trip there in the third week of June that I'm really interested in, along with Elijah Newby. 2 players in the top 24/7, 2 guys who could really impact your defensive plans moving forward. Ume, Newby, what's the latest there? Newby was obviously a major riser along with his Cheshire Academy teammate Luke Reynolds in the latest top 24/7 update.
Newby was originally supposed to be part of the big June 9th weekend, but he kind of shifted things around. He's going to be at South Carolina that weekend instead. He did a little flip-flop there. He's got family in South Carolina, in Columbia, right by South Carolina's campus, so I think that's something to monitor. But the word is that Penn State is pretty high on Newby's list entering official visits. Some people say that Penn State leads for him. So I think that the combination of the staff starting to push harder and harder for him as the cycle has gone on, and now you have Luke Reynolds, at Cheshire, who's committed, and he's been doing plenty of recruiting. Trust me, as Lucas told me, he's been trying to get Elijah Newby in this class. And I mean, Dante Reno was doing the same thing from the South Carolina side of Cheshire. So he's got.
Luke's not a shy guy. Luke is not a shy guy. He'll be recruiting for this program. Yeah.
Yeah, he's up for the task. But I mean, Newby, athletic backer who the staff really likes, one of those guys Manny Diaz has kind of fallen in love with along with Chris Cole in this cycle. Athletic backers who kind of do it all for you in the middle of a defense. And with Ume, it's been a recruitment that is on the quieter side of the spectrum, but it seems like Michigan is kind of fading a little bit. I'm not sure whether that's Ume's interest or a numbers thing at Michigan because their class is already pretty crowded. I mean, they've got a lot of guys on board, and we just mentioned Poly trending towards the Wolverines. I'm not really sure where that leaves Ume on their board or where that leaves his level of interest in the program at this point in the cycle. But I think either way, I think Penn State has positioned itself the best. Right now, the other two official visits he's going to make in June are Duke and Stanford. And I think that presents a very winnable recruitment for Penn State. I know Ume is very big on academics. That's not a slight at Duke or Stanford in terms of football pedigree. It's just I think that he got to Penn State in April, and he realized that it could be a place where he could get a pretty good academic experience and play some high-level ball. And I think that has the Nittany Lions high on his list ahead of that June 16th trip to campus.
Now, before June wraps up and everybody gets a little vacation time, typically you'll see some of the coaching staff, recruiting staff get some family time wherever away from campus for a little while before everyone regroups and gets back to work for the final stretch of summer and then preseason camp. There's a couple late events late in July. Of course, we look forward to Lash Bash every year, but this is the last big weekend of the summer for some time, for about a month's span, and it's June 23rd, 25th. And what stands out to me here is, yet again, going back to that receiver spot. We've seen them fill a lot of different positions this spring in the 2024 recruiting class. What we have not seen with a first-year assistant coach in Marcus Hagans is that wide receiver spot get addressed yet. You mentioned Marsh coming to campus. He's obviously a big target, a lot in play with him. But a couple names that stand out to me, at least tentatively thus far. There's a fluid nature to all of this, but Josiah Brown out of New York, and then Jeray Hawkins, who's now down at IMG Academy in Bradenton. Go through these because these are not names that just popped up. There's been some newer wide receiver names, but these are names we've been accustomed to discussing on the 2024 board.
I personally love these two guys, man. I think they got the chance to be big-time players at the next level. With Brown, I don't think he's going to be on campus that weekend at this point. I think he's going to do some moving around with his schedule. It's looking more like – I still have to hear back from him on this, but it's looking more like he's going to be there on the 16th. But he's going to visit Penn State in June. That's not up for debate or up in the air for him. He's going to be on campus for an official. It's really just a matter of whether it's June 16th or June 23rd. Nittany Lions are in a good spot in that recruitment. Georgia and Rutgers are the competition. And then with Hawkins, I mean, it's interesting now that he's down in Florida because, he's got those two official visits lined up to Florida, Miami, now are in-state schools for him being down at IMG. They've got easy access to him. So I think, going from West Virginia to Florida definitely was an interesting element in his recruitment. Those schools weren't heavily involved really until he got down there. So he's going to be visiting those two programs before making it to Penn State. He's still up there for the staff. There are definitely some guys ahead of him, the Marshes of the world, but Hornsby's another one. But I think that, his speed is undeniable, and he's definitely someone that the staff is going to be looking at really hard when he makes it to campus. I'm really excited about those two and, their potential. And, if they wind up at Penn State, I think the Lions are going to be winded up with two pretty good players. That's just part of the storyline with the June 23rd weekend, man. We talk about that as kind of a weekend that the staff is reserving and holding back. But, there are some important names going to be there as well.
Yeah, believe it or not, this was essentially a teaser conversation for the list that Tyler put together. It was that comprehensive and that long at this point, and still room to potentially grow and change day to day, week to week here. And putting a bow on the official visits discussion here, Tyler, what position room do you think stands to maybe have the most explosive June? You had those fireworks, and really the way we view it coming out of June is a lot different than the way we view it going into the month.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think I know the two they would like to have the most fireworks would be wide receiver and defensive line. I think those are two areas where they really want to make some moves this June. Right now, if I had to guess, I'd probably say receiver because I think that there's a real chance that they get Nick Marsh. I think there's a real chance they get Josiah Brown. I think there's a real chance they get Jeray Hawkins. So I think if those three guys want to commit, the staff's not saying no. And that would leave you with 3 top 24/7 prospects in your class. And I didn't even mention Jalen Hornsby, who's definitely a candidate to join the group as well. I mean, it's just a matter of Penn State has helped itself recently with a lot of its top wide receiver targets. Now that these guys are getting in camps for officials, it's time for Marcus Hagans and the staff to close the deal with those guys. I think that's going to be the priority, making sure maybe some of these recruitments wrap up very, very soon. And I think there's a real chance that could happen for Penn State. So I would say wide receiver right now. Defensive line would be my second choice. This is a big June for the new position coaches on the Penn State staff, Marcus Hagans and Deion Barnes. There's going to be a lot of eyes on them and what they could accomplish with this official visit slate.
I want to get into a mailbag question for our VIP subscribers at Lions247.com. It's pinned to the message board. Now we've got our mailbag treated as such. If you go over to our message board, Lions Pride, place your question in there. The other way, if you're not a subscriber, leave a 5-star review. We'll still take those at Apple Podcasts if you want to drop in your question. But we're going to prioritize our VIP folks, obviously, and we're going to pluck a question out of there right now for a mailbag with you. And this one centers on a remaining component of the 2024 recruiting class. Maybe from the outside looking in, you see Grunkmeyer commit, be the Elite 11 finalist, and you think, okay, neat and tidy, quarterback's done. Well, we've been talking for a while about the 2 quarterback potential within this cycle, and this question leads us that way. Who would be Penn State's best fit as a second QB in the 2024 class?
I would say it's Miles O'Neill. Mike Yurcich just gets out to New England, gets to Massachusetts to see him throw, offers that day. And I just think that it's really a question where the answer comes down to it's either Miles O'Neill or it's Trevor Jackson from Florida, who's also an Elite 11 finalist and will be participating out in California later this summer. My O'Neill would be my guy in this situation. I love the arm strength with him. I think that if he didn't grow up in an area where, Massachusetts and New England football, it's coming along and it's getting more eyes on it, but it's not like it is in the South and in other parts of the country. And I think if O'Neill grew up elsewhere, I think, he would have been a highly touted recruit for a while now. I think he's got that kind of upside arm strength. I mean, man, he drives balls into tight windows. His arm strength just pops on film. And I know the staff sees that too. So right now, I think it would be O'Neill. I mean, in a perfect world, it's the Florida State commit, Luke Kromenik, right? I mean, that's the guy Penn State staff has loved throughout the cycle. But with where things are, oh my God, I can't talk today. With where things are in the cycle, it's got to be Miles O'Neill for me. I think the upside and the talent that's already present there, I think that the Penn State staff, that'd be a pretty good get for them.
Well, we didn't get a chance to see him at Elite 11, unfortunately. He had some other obligations going on, so we didn't get to watch him side by side against Ethan Grunkemeyer and some of these other guys like Dante Reno. But we do know that he got a chance to check out campus. He was there last week. He was all over the country last week checking out some schools. But Penn State got its opportunity to make the impact after offering him. What was the feedback coming away from that visit? I know Steve Wiltfong caught up with Miles O'Neill, and there was a story over at Lions247.com. I know you spoke with some folks as well involved with the recruitment. Where do they come out of that, and what does this process look like moving forward?
Well, Penn State is definitely under consideration to get an official at this point. They're one of the schools, and they're running for that. And it really comes down to that visit was mostly about, X's and O's, scheme fit. O'Neill just getting more comfortable with campus and his surroundings and, evaluating his potential fit on and off the field. I think the Penn State staff feels that he accomplished a lot in that regard while he was in town. I think they feel like they made some headway with him. But it's coming back to a conversation that me and you have had. He does have O'Neill does have opportunities to be part of a 2 quarterback class in multiple programs, right? Texas A&M is after him, and they have Anthony Maddox committed. And, Penn State's not the only other program with a quarterback already committed after O'Neill. Likewise, he has the chance to go to a place like Michigan State or Virginia and be the guy in a class. So, he's been consistent with me in saying that it doesn't matter that Penn State has a quarterback committed. He's not evaluating things through that lens. But, when it comes time for him to really sit down and make this decision, would he prefer to be in a 1 quarterback class or a 2 quarterback class? I think that's something that, the conversations are going to be had. They're going to have to happen because it's a big call. And, O'Neill's a competitor, right? That's why he's so not fazed by being part of a 2 quarterback class. He feels like he's one of the best and he could go out there and compete with anyone. So if he were to come to Penn State, that's the mindset he would be bringing with him. And that's something that the staff picked up on while he was on campus. So I would say it was a positive visit for both parties. And now really it's just wait and see if Penn State gets that official visit. You know, he's still putting that schedule together. Virginia's one he has locked in. He's going to be there this weekend, but the rest of it is still coming together beyond that. Penn State's right in the mix.
And Grunkemeyer, of course, obviously embraced the possibility of a 2-quarterback class, that they were transparent about that with him. And we've seen it play out. I mean, Bo Perbula saw Mike Yurcich show up to campus and offer like 3 or 4 quarterbacks his first couple of weeks around town. He let Bo know, and Bo was aware, and Bo knew the whole time, even when Kirk Shiraka was the offensive coordinator, that they may end up with a second quarterback. It was always a part of the dialogue. It was always something that Bo Perbula was comfortable with from a competitive standpoint. And I don't think he ever anticipated it would be the number 1 quarterback in the entire country based on our rankings, but that's who he got, and he stuck it through the finish line. Whereas I remember the year before we had him on our podcast and he talked about the subject. Christian Veillere made it very clear that in his conversations with the coaching staff, with James Franklin, with offensive coordinator Kirk Shiraka, that he wanted to be a solo act at the quarterback position within his recruiting class in 2021. So we've seen James Franklin sign 3 multi-quarterback classes, one of which got to campus last year with Drew and Bo. You saw Taquan Roberson, Michael Johnson Jr. Neither found success here in the Penn State's offense. And way back in his initial recruiting class, Michael O'Connor was the commitment that he inherited at quarterback, and some guy named Trace McSorley was the one that James Franklin picked up in that late scramble when he was piecing together the 2014 recruiting class. Looks like we could have another one on our hands in 2024. Let's look at 2025 real quick, because there was an offer that you wrote about at lions247.com about a new offer that went out. Adam Schauflin looks like he could project as one of the premier players in the New England prep school scene. Another one of those players from St. Thomas More, a program that Penn State signed a pair of prospects out of in the 2023 cycle.
Yeah, so he's a Pennsylvania native who had decided to go the prep route up in New England, and I think it worked wonders for his recruitment, really, and where he's at in his development. You know, Penn State, USC, a bunch of other big-time programs involved with him, and he basically told me, I mean, this isn't one of those offers, growing up in PA, it's one of those things that, you grow up in the environment and you see everyone rocking the navy blue. It's something that you want to be part of. And I think it's definitely something that he's considering. Penn State didn't offer as early as some of the other Power 5 programs involved with Schauflin. Doesn't really matter to him. He understands the process. He understands the evaluations that needed to take place. And he understands that his relationship with the staff is in a good place. So when the offer came in, didn't really matter much to him. He's really enjoyed talking to the Penn State staff throughout his process. Granted, he's at 2025. He's not able to have that direct contact, so there hasn't been, there's going to be more opportunities for him to connect with the staff moving forward. He's looking forward to getting back on campus during the summer, whether it be for a camp or just an unofficial visit. But staff likes him. Sullivan likes Penn State. I think this is going to be a name we're talking about plenty throughout the 2025 cycle.
So from a Penn State target with a couple more years left at the high school level to one with 1 year left at the junior college level, we kept this one aside from the official visit conversation because he falls into a different category. But Sione Lolea, I hope I'm saying that correctly. If I'm not, we'll work to correct it if he remains on the recruiting forefront for Penn State. But out of the College of San Mateo in California, 2024 junior college prospect. Fits the Terry Smith target to a bill, and being that 6'3", 6'4" rangy cornerback, a lot of length there. What do we make of this visit, which is scheduled to take place, the official visit variety for a junior college player?
Well, to start, I think you got his last name right, so that's good. You're not like me.
Great.
Yeah, that's great. You don't butcher last names, man. That's my department. But we've traded some text recently, me and Leia, and he's very excited to make this visit. He's really hyped about it, mainly because he really appreciated that Terry Smith got out to California and made that offer in person directly during the May evaluation period. I think that was something that really resonated with him. I think it was one of the only schools who did it. I think Penn State was one of the only ones to get out there and offer him in person. So that was big for him. Penn State's really intrigued by his length as an outside cornerback. He's listed at 6'4". I mean, I think his wingspan is like 79 inches or something like that. And it's really it's an interesting name that has popped up because, when you think about official visit season, you don't necessarily think of junior college products all the time. Sure. But Lole is one of them. And, I think this is a recruitment that has the potential to swing in Penn State's favor really in a hurry. I honestly think that Lole is that high on Smith in the program, and it wouldn't impact the plans at corner moving forward because we've touched on it. There's a chance on every cornerback you take winds up sticking at corner. And Jameer Grimsley has a place in this class, really, no matter what else happens at the position.
And he's on a different eligibility timeline coming out of the junior college level. So he's working with a different clock. Yeah,
man. Even full eligibility versus a guy who's going to come with a little bit shortened of a timeline for eligibility. And that's perfectly fine. That's something that the staff, is okay with, obviously, taking this official visit. So it's going to be – I'm looking forward to talking to him coming out of the official, just given how excited he is about it. And I think that coming out of this visit, it's going to be interesting to see what's next for him in terms of, A, does he make other visits? And 2, where do those visits occur? And also, where does he stand on the Penn State board? You get a junior college proc. You like to get eyes on him in person. Granted, Terry Smith has already done that, but, you get him to campus, see how the vibe is, and you go from there.
Yeah, bunch of Pac-12 offers that you anticipate for a guy who's playing JUCO ball out in California on the West Coast, but Miami, Oklahoma, Ole Miss, some of the non-regional offers there, including Penn State, they'll get a chance to see what he's like, and he'll get a chance to see what Penn State's like, and we'll keep close tabs on this. Of course, the junior college level has treated the secondary pretty well. 2 all Big Ten safeties recently, Jaquan Brisker, Jair Brown, both coming out of Lackawanna College, which it feels like it's in the backyard around here. So going long distance cross country to a guy with this kind of an offer sheet would say a lot about the brand at cornerback right now for Terry Smith, but we'll see if there's a fit for both sides. We'll monitor that one. Wanted to finish with off with this one, a top 5 for a top 100 prospect. Penn State's on the list for lineman Amaris Williams. This offer just went out. He's a 2024 prospect, so consider me intrigued.
Yeah, I'm definitely intrigued as well, mainly because, we've gone from the offer being issued to a top 5 to a potential official visitor, depending on how things play out. And
out of Clinton, North Carolina, I should put that out there. We're not a local kid here.
Not a local kid, but one of those regional guys who, has kind of been on the radar throughout the cycle. Didn't get an offer until recently, like we just said, but word is the staff likes him. And if it could get an official visit in June, that was something, that the staff would like to explore. I think this is one that we'll definitely be monitoring because there's a lot of movement with that interior defensive line board. He's not the only guy who may or may not be making an official visit. T.A. Cunningham is another one who we've been hearing will visit Penn State at some point in June, but we're not sure when. And I think Williams kind of falls into that category right now, but it's more if than when with him, as opposed to Cunningham. It's more when than if. But Williams definitely, he's an intriguing player. I was checking out his tape. I mean, you see the dominance. You see why he's a top 100 prospect. Got a really impressive top 5, and Penn State, I think they're just going to see what happens here. They're a little late to the party, so they have some ground to make up, but that's a battle the staff is prepared to deal with.
Williams top 5, Florida, Georgia, NC State, Tennessee, and Penn State, and he's going to be making official visits to NC State and Florida to work his way through early stages of June. We'll see what comes of this one, but he's a top 20 overall defensive line prospect out of North Carolina and a top 100 overall recruit in the 2024 class. So things in motion there at the very least, and we'll see if it pays off with an opportunity to get him and some family members on campus for 48 hours, and then you see what you got after that. Tyler Calvaruso, great coverage as always. It is a minute-by-minute, day-to-day situation this time of year, so make sure you're following our coverage of all things Nittany Lions recruiting. I know Steve Wiltfong, our director of recruiting coverage at 24/7 Sports, jumped in with an article about an anticipated June and what this month could mean for Penn State. So we are all in on recruiting coverage. Tyler, we'll have you on the podcast very soon, I'm sure.
We've got a lot more to come, man. I hope everyone keeps on listening.
All right, good stuff. Thanks to Tyler Calvaruso, my partner in crime here at Lions247.com, and then to Brad Crawford, who does a great job covering the national college football landscape for 24/7 Sports. We're back with a second episode later this week. We're back on the Penn State prospect camp circuit this weekend. A lot of things cooking over at Lions247.com. Thanks for following us throughout the month of May. A lot of things to dive into come June here in the Lions 24/7 podcast.